What is so scary about death? Hey, it's me, Honestly T, and today I want to talk about death. It is spooky season. Everyone and their grandmother is talking about their favorite scary movies. Funnily enough, I didn't even realize that this was going to go up in October and that it was going to be that whole thing. I just had a lot in my mind, I guess. So, I'm actually going to be talking specifically about what it is that about death that particularly scares me. I don't say this as like a hot take, like, am I the only one who's afraid of death? I'm just saying that I'm coming at this at a very particular sort of lens. Also, I'm not really going to be looking at the theological side of things. The topic of this video is not theology, so don't try to debate me on theology. My fear of death is not related to what happens after I die, but rather what happens before is all I'm getting at. See, I'm maybe oddly comfortable accepting when things are completely out of my control, whether they be potentially good or potentially bad, even the most good or the most bad. I am much more anxious in the moments when I have to make a decision that might turn out to be, the most important decision I ever make, that might lead to my death or some other catastrophe. For example, a lot of people are afraid of flying because if something happens to the plane, you can't do anything. But for me, that's why I like flying. My weird sort of logic is that the less decision making I have to do, the less of a participant I am in my own demise. When it comes to plane travel, I have to make one decision, whether or not to get on the plane. But if I'm, say, riding a train, every time the train stops, I get to decide whether or not to get off the train. It's like the sections of time when the train is in motion are all opportunities for something bad to happen, and every stop is likewise an opportunity to stop the potentially bad thing from happening to me. And when it comes to driving, yikes. Seriously, I don't know how billions of people do it. You choose to go left instead of right, you don't yield fast enough, forget to look before you change lanes, and blam, dead. You and maybe everyone in the car with you. It's terrifying. What this comes down to is sort of being afraid of your own agency. A couple years ago, I was watching a stand-up special, and the comedian did a bit about intrusive thoughts that helped me so much because it gave a name to my experience. Basically, intrusive thoughts are when you have continued violent or disturbing thoughts that you can't control. For some, it could be a symptom of PTSD. For others, it can manifest as a sudden urge to be destructive. Like if you're standing near the edge of a train platform and the train is pulling in, and out of nowhere, a voice in your head goes, "What if I jumped?" You don't actually have any desire to jump, but you're so afraid that you might for no reason that you reflexively back up. This is apparently pretty common with anxious people. I guess it's your mind's way of alerting you to possible dangers so that you retreat from it, which it's nice and all, but it has the bonus effect of making you afraid all the time of completely innocuous situations. I also want to mention that for me, the fear isn't debilitating. Like, I do typically avoid driving, but I still ride public transportation. I still walk down the street at night when I have to, still travel to the top of open air tall buildings, and I still go places, even if I have to go alone. I take an incredible amount of risks, even as all of these things give me anxiety, because I don't want to let my worst case scenario brain keep me from living my best case scenario life. Still, the voice never goes away. When I was younger, there was an incident down the street from my school where a man ran his car through a gas station into a store, killing a woman. I think about this a lot. I wonder what enticed this woman to stop at that particular moment at that particular gas station. I imagine that she was on her way home and just wanted a candy bar. For some reason, it scares me a lot more to think I might die in some random accident brought about by some small potatoes decision I made than that I might die at the hands of some nefarious criminal or serial killer or terrorist. Because to die with no motive, no reason, for being in the wrong place at the wrong time, for going left instead of right, seems so grossly absurd to me that it chills me to my core. If you've ever watched Final Destination, you know exactly where I'm going with this. Final Destination is a messy franchise. It explores ideas related to free will and predestination, the utility of companionship and survival, and touches on elements of the mystic in signs and omens. It's genuinely ominous, and yet the horror isn't centered in some spooky mansion or secluded cabin, but features regular people running headlong into the horror unwittingly as they just try to live their everyday lives. At the same time, the series as a whole is generally, I think, not taken very seriously because of the over-the-top and mostly ludicrous Rube Goldbergian type death scenes. And also because it's, unintentionally hilarious. There are a lot of logical missteps, scenes that try to be tense but are just really corny. The romantic subplots are bad. There are some death scenes that give me goosebumps every time I watch them, like the elevator scene in Final Destination 2 and the tanning bed scene in Final Destination 3. And then there are others that seem like they're trying to be hokey. There's a scene in the second movie where this guy escapes a burning building only to slip on spaghetti that he threw out the window and then almost get impaled by a ladder, sigh of relief, not move at all, and then get impaled by the ladder. And then there's another in the third movie where there are real swords in this gym just poised above an exercise machine, and they fall, because of course they do, but they don't fall on the guy. They just sever the cords of the exercise machine, and the guy is completely fine, and he sees that the machine has just been broken, and for no reason at all decides to use the broken machine again, and of course he gets his head splatted by the weights. The cheekiness is much more pronounced in the latter movies. I think that much like the Saw franchise, as the Final Destination franchise continued, it became less about exploring interesting concepts and more about body horror and leaning into its own ridiculousness. And if you're gonna try to tell me that it was always like that, I'm gonna have to tell you that you're wrong. So if you don't know anything about Final Destination, basically the entire franchise follows the same story structure. The main character has a premonition that they're going to die in a major catastrophe. They manage to avoid said disaster and save a handful of people basically by accident. Then, months after the fact, the survivors start to die off, one by one, in horrible and sometimes convoluted freak accidents. So there are currently 5 Final Destination films. And that's the only time I'm gonna admit that, because I hated the last 2 movies. I think that they were the epitome of sequel rot. And while I've been constantly rewatching the first 3 since I was 8 years old, I've only watched the last 2 once, and that was enough. I'll get into later why I didn't like the last 2, but right now, I want to gush. When I tell you that I love Final Destination, my love has layers. The first is probably pretty easy to guess, given what I've already said. I've maybe watched the series over a dozen times in my life, and even as I laugh at it, it leaves me with a sense of foreboding every time. Something that I just don't get with other horror movies. Unlike other scary movie villains, you can't hide from death, or run from it, or fight it. We're all walking blindfolded through perilous terrain, and we have no idea if the next step we take will lead us off a cliff. This is summed up quite nicely in the first movie by this guy.
Every single move we make, from the mundane to the monumental, the red light that we stop at or run, the airplanes that we ride or walk out of, it's all part of death's sadistic design leading to the grave.
There's a lot of talk of Death's design, but he clearly isn't an omnipotent puppet master. These people still have free will, or they wouldn't be able to cheat death in the first place. Which somehow makes it worse. Death can't do it alone. He has to rely on you to move a certain way, to dance with him, to do what is expected. Which brings me to my second layer. I love really any media that portrays death as a character. I don't know why, but I find it so interesting. Is Death going to be stoic and ambivalent about humans? Is he going to be sympathetic, fascinated even by life? Is he weary? Is he malicious and cruel? I'm always interested to see how people interpret death as a feeling thing. I like Final Destination's depiction especially because while Death is undoubtedly a character, he isn't like the Grim Reaper. He doesn't have lines or even appear fully formed. He's just working in the background. We have to determine what he's like through his actions. An impetuous lightning strike. Not Gwen's remark about how her friend's deaths felt vicious. I like to write a whole second background story into the narrative of FD. Like, maybe Death is pretty chill normally, but then these humans decide to just mess with his design and make his job needlessly difficult. So, like, instead of just, I don't know, giving them a heart attack and calling it a day, he feels the need to orchestrate these grand punishments. And what about the premonitions? Are they innate, or could they be coming from another mystic source? Alex mentions that something is trying to warn him. We hear voices whisper his name. Is it an angel, or ghost, or God? What are the intentions of this God? To actually try and save the humans? To just mess with them? To mess with death? In like a trickster kind of way? What was the point of them living a little bit longer just to be dragged through hell and earth? Was it even a good thing that they got a second chance? Which brings me to my last point. Everyone dies in Final Destination. If they don't die in their own movie, they die in the next. But in the meantime, they engage in this game of life and death, complete with little hints, playing against literal gods. And I love it. Which is maybe a bit ironic because that directly contradicts what I said about Final Destination being scary because it represents the real life terror of death being random and unforeseeable. In fact, one of the things that bugs me about the later Final Destination sequels is that despite the fact that they all happen in the same universe, and the characters say that they know about the other premonition cases, we still have to waste increasingly more time figuring out that, oh wow, it's happening again, let's band together to fight this thing.
Guess how you two sound like crazy.
And even though it's more realistic, I guess, for the characters to die having no clue that they've been targeted by death and that they can beat it temporarily by solving these riddles 3. It is why I never really felt the need to go back to the last 2 films. The characters don't talk to one another. They don't try to play the game. They really are just mannequins to toss into the proverbial wood chipper. Not really characters as much as they were walking meat sacks. You know who's not a meat sack? Alex freaking Browning. I absolutely adore this character. Alex Browning is the person who gets the premonition in the first Final Destination, and he plays the game. From day one, he knows that something is off, okay? He loses his mind trying to learn the rules that will allow him to outmaneuver a literal god. Meanwhile, his knowledge consistently comes at the price of losing a friend. Alex represents an extreme form of human tenacity. No matter how much he loses, he just keeps enduring because he knows that there is much more to lose. This boy endures the trauma of experiencing his own death, ostracization by his classmates, the police hunting him down, his best friend dying, and the gravity of feeling personally responsible for the safety of the people he saved. Throughout the film, Alex becomes more and more manic. He's convinced himself that he is playing a game that he can win. So much, in fact, that he is willing to die because he thinks it'll really save someone. But he can't.
You know what to do. When I do this, it'll skip you and it'll all be over, okay? The only way we can see death again.
This gamification format makes it seem like there's hope, but there isn't. To me, this whole movie is sort of beautifully tragic. Like watching someone trying to swim up from the bottom of the ocean. It does make me wonder if there was a point, if Alex's extra year or so alive was worth it, if any decision that he made meant anything, if he was gonna die anyway. He played a game that he was destined to lose. But honestly, I can't decide if he did lose. He cheated death twice, even though his life afterwards was short and mostly horrific. He did the impossible. He regained agency over death. While making this video, I came across an alternate ending to the first movie. In the original ending, Alex is right. He sacrifices himself and he wins the game. Clear and Carter survive. Clear even has Alex's kid. I'm conflicted about this ending. I like that Alex's death means something, that his decisions definitively meant something, that there is a limit to death's abilities, and therefore no limit to human tenacity. And yet, it felt less satisfying. So, the question then becomes, when it comes to death, do we accept tragedy or embrace hope? Also, FD3 has the best deaths and the best gamification framing with the little picture things, but the worst inciting incident of the three, the roller coaster scene, was just real ludicrous. Unless we count the two that don't exist, then it's definitely leagues above the race car thing.